Thank you again for that warm welcome. I'm delighted to be here with you. I know this is a very busy time of year when many parents are kind of scrambling with their kids to get back into the routine of the school year, return to another what looks to be an untraditional year of school. And when Lorraine invited me to come back and talk to the Loudoun County Public Library community, I really gave some thought to what would be meaningful content that I could share this evening for parents who have kids with dyslexia who may be attending an IEP meeting, maybe already have, or maybe next week. And to really give you some important information on what I view are critical mistakes that parents make at the IEP table. So let's go ahead and get started. As Lorraine said, I'm a passionate advocate for individuals who have dyslexia. I've been on a personal mission for over 10 years now to ensure that children who have dyslexia have the supports, the services, the accommodations, the assistive technology, the appropriate training that they need in our public school systems so that not only can they access their curriculum, but they can really thrive in a public school setting with appropriate supports and services. So I'm delighted to be here. I want this to be an interactive conversation. I know Lorraine said that some individuals will be watching it later, and we'll talk about how you can get in touch with us if you have questions after tonight's live event. But it's really, been an honor to be a part of many conversations here in Loudoun County, where I live, and across the state of Virginia. And one thing that I continue to be shocked about is just how many people do not understand the implications of dyslexia, what it's like to be a child with dyslexia, as well as the parent of a child with dyslexia trying to advocate within your public school system. So, people say to me, well, how did you get started in this work? And why did you decide to create a business around dyslexia advocacy? And I have to say that, like many parents that I serve, my journey really began with my own son, who's now a junior in high school, when he was in first grade in elementary school. And my bright and capable son, who was, the teachers told me he was an excellent problem solver and inventive thinker, he was struggling to learn basic academic skills. He couldn't write letters correctly. He couldn't memorize sight words. He couldn't read basic words. And spelling was atrocious, as well as when he got into third grade, memorizing multiplication facts was something he just wasn't capable of. And, at that time, I had a lot of discussions with school teachers and administrators, and even my son's pediatrician. And I was shocked at how little was known about dyslexia. And while I'm thrilled that we live in a more aware society today, and in Northern Virginia, many of our schools do now say the words dyslexia, they know what it is, parents do still have to be a important part of the IEP team and advocate for what they believe their child needs to be successful. So we're going to talk about how you can do that and how to avoid some of those curveballs. But, most of my clients say to me, Lorraine, you're the only one who likes going to IEP meetings. And I'll tell you, I really do enjoy going with families to IEP meetings, because to me, it's a wonderful opportunity to really change the conversation for that child about their needs, about the instruction, the intervention, the accommodations that have been in place, and make a meaningful difference in a pretty short period of time. But I am well aware that the average parent would rather be anywhere else, and that many parents, don't feel prepared for an IEP meeting and feel like they do make a lot of mistakes when they are put, kind of in that arena, let's say. Sometimes it's just the emotional toll of sitting there and listening to a school team, who maybe knows your child, maybe they don't know your child, talk about what your child is poor at, or borderline deficient in, or really, below grade level in. And sometimes it's just the onslaught of data and charts and figures that are being presented to parents, and they really don't understand how to interpret all of that. But it can be an emotional process. And for the parents who have dyslexia themselves, we're going to talk about how you can work around that issue. But sometimes they just can't follow along. They can't read the documents. They may have slower processing. As we've talked about in previous presentations, Lorraine, dyslexia is neurobiological in nature. So this is a inherited condition, and oftentimes parents do not feel if they have dyslexia that they can meaningfully participate in their child's meeting. But at the end of the day, I always like to say, to parents, what is the purpose of the IEP meeting? And it really is the opportunity to work with your school team, your school district, to affect change for your child. Anything of importance with regards to your child's education, and we're talking about their academic needs, their social emotional needs, the type of specialized instruction they may be receiving as part of having an IEP. And I just want to say, for those who are new to the special education community, when we refer to IEPs, we're talking about a federal education plan that's put in place for kids with disabilities so that they can have certain supports and services that aren't available to the general public. So if you are a parent of a student who has an IEP, it's really important that you become comfortable year after year, minimum of at least once a year, attending IEP meetings and comfortable advocating for your child's needs, for certain goals that you believe they require to make progress, for certain assistive technology and other accommodations. And we'll talk a little bit later on about when it's appropriate to include your child in this process so that they can also advocate for themselves. But the first mistake that I want to touch on that is more common than I wish it were is that too many parents don't realize they are an equal member of the IEP team. And so, parents tend to be very reactive to IEP meeting notifications. Oh, my school has sent me a notice. They want to meet with me about my child. We're going to have an IEP meeting. I guess I have to show up, which, yes, of course, we do have to show up when we're asked to attend for an IEP meeting. But at the same time, I want to emphasize tonight that parents under IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that governs IEPs in our public school system, the IDEA regulations have already determined that parents are an essential member of the IEP team. And I think too often parents don't realize that that's actually written into the regulation and that school teams actually have to demonstrate a certain amount of due diligence to ensure that they have communicated with parents in their native language, that they've let them know, we're going to have a meeting about your child. Here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what you're giving consent to. Because again, parents play a critical role. And a lot of times I think it's easy to feel that because maybe we don't have masters in education or we don't have a PhD, that we're not the educational experts for our kids. But because we have been there most often since day one, and we get to talk with our kids after school when they come home and kind of feel in a safe environment to really release what has gone on for them during the school day, what's been challenging, what went well. Parents are experts on their children, and under IDEA, that expertise is respected and they are essential members of the team. And we're going to talk about what does that mean here. So if you are an essential member of your child's IEP team, how might you handle things differently? And I'm going to suggest that you should ask for what you need. And one of those, one of the important tools that I believe parents need is a copy of their child's proposed IEP at least a couple of days before the IEP meeting. So just to back up, when a school team has determined that a student has been found eligible for special education services and supports because they have dyslexia or another qualifying disability, the school district has about 30 days in which they can propose an IEP for your child. But too often I hear from parents that say, we never saw the IEP document until we were sitting at the table and it was in front of us and we were supposed to read it and speak about it and participate in decision making, and we really didn't, we could have benefited from having that in advance. So one of the important things I want to encourage tonight is that if you're going to your child's IEP meeting, that you do reach out to your child's case manager or the school special education designee, that you ask for a draft document of the IEP at least 2 business days prior to the meeting, that you ask for any, assessment data, evaluation data that's going to be discussed in your child's meeting, that you would like to also have that at least 2 days in advance. And as we said earlier, if you are a parent of a child and you have a disability, you can ask for that information to be provided to you in your native language or in a format that is accessible to you. And that might be, with text audio text so that you can understand, what you're looking at on all of these documents. I also do encourage parents to request a list of meeting attendees in advance. While the IDEA regulation does say that there are certain individuals who must participate in a child's IEP meeting, including parents, sometimes there are team members that are not listed to attend an IEP meeting that could be very impactful for a student. And when we're talking about a student with dyslexia, I'm specifically thinking of the reading teacher that might be providing any type of different intervention, specialized services there, or a literacy curriculum specialist, or a dyslexia specialist, or maybe a speech language pathologist. In some cases, we need to bring in an assistive technology specialist for the district. But I think it's important for parents as they get their pre-meeting documents gathered together that they consider who's going to be at the IEP table. And do we have the appropriate decision makers that we need in the room to have a productive discussion about, their child? And if you need to, request someone else. If someone is missing, reach out and ask that that person join the meeting. A lot of the times when parents are going to IEP meetings, they will call me and say, well, they're only going to give us 45 minutes, or they said we're limited to an hour. And that's pretty standard because administrators and teachers are putting these IEP meetings in between all of their regular duties. So I don't think parents should be put off by the fact that the school team is telling them we only have an hour for this discussion, unless it's been a very long time since you've been together with your school's IEP team. And in that case, you could ask for an extended meeting. You could say, I want our time to be as impactful as possible. Could we pick a date and time when I can have an hour and a half or maybe 2 hours for that discussion because we have a lot of information to go over? Or you simply agree to the 45 minutes or the 60 minutes, and we'll talk a little bit about ensuring that you have a follow-up meeting date and time so you can continue that discussion, at a later date that works for everyone on the IEP team. So mistake number 2, and this is a big one for me as an educational advocate, is parents often underestimate the critical role that data plays when they're trying to advocate for their child. And, it's easy to understand why this is because, as we said, parents don't do this every day. They're experts on their own children. They have observations from watching their kids come home, from doing homework, but they're really not used to interpreting, psychoeducational evaluations or fluency assessments or things of that nature. But what I want to emphasize tonight is that even parent anecdotal data, even parent observations has, that data, that quality of data has been validated by the Virginia Department of Education, who came out with guidance documents during the pandemic and has said, school staff doesn't have the same level of access to children with disabilities as parents do. And that as members of eligibility teams and IEP teams, we really do need to be listening to parents and considering whatever data they have to share, even if it is just their parental observations. And some parents keep, a journal of how long homework takes and what the child could do and what they couldn't do and how long it took. But all of this data, whatever it is what the IEP team is going to use to determine your child's unique needs and what they're going to be writing their educational plan to address. So when we're talking about, what does a child need in the IEP, it's all based on data. And if you, in a moment, I'll talk a little bit more about, well, what if you don't have the data that you need to have a productive IEP discussion? What can parents do to get that data? But at a minimum, when a child is found eligible for special education services, the school district has done their own assessment. So there's already, a socio-cultural evaluation that's going to be considered. There's a psychological evaluation to be considered. There's an educational evaluation. There's teacher input. And there's parent input. So at a minimum, that data is what should be driving the IEP team's discussion and the determination about what that student needs. And of course, When we look at all of the data, the intention as an IEP team is we're supposed to be determining what are that student's present levels of performance. And we're not just talking academic, but of course, that's the first thing that comes, to most parents and even teachers and administrators' minds is, where is that child in terms of grade level and comparison to peers? In light of their average to above average intelligence, because students who have dyslexia do need to have average to above average intelligence to qualify for that disability. So where are they performing on the scale when we look at skills like, spelling and decoding, which is like being able to sound out words, and written expression and reading fluency and phonemic awareness, what are that child's present levels and where are their areas of need? And that's, looking at the data informs the team on how that child is performing and what their unique needs are. And when we're talking about unique needs, I do want to mention that this isn't just academic in nature, right? Especially during, I think it's our second year now of this ongoing pandemic. Lorraine and I were talking earlier about there's a lot of upset in the world right now, and a lot of our kids are feeling it. So many of our students who didn't have anxiety, they're returning to school now with anxiety or maybe even a generalized anxiety disorder. Sometimes students with dyslexia also have attention challenges. All of these deficits, in spite of a lot of strengths, because our kids with dyslexia have a lot of strengths most of the time, they can internalize a lot of this anxiety and this stress. And so an IEP team, in addition to looking at a child's needs, should also be looking at academic, social, emotional, as well as the student's strengths. So when we talk about data, and I think that, we've just given you some examples, or I've given you some examples of what are sources of data, data drives all IEP decisions. I want to say that again, because too often parents go to IEP meetings as requested, and they bring a lot of emotion, and they often don't think about bringing the data. And the emotion, while it's important, sometimes to convey the level of frustration that your child is having, everything that you've tried that isn't working, it's ultimately the data that's going to drive the decisions at the IEP table. And as we say here, you want to first, as a parent, make sure the team is determining your child's unique needs. It's from those needs, the IEP team should be determining the goals, and then the goals are what's going to drive the determination of what is an appropriate service for your child. Do they need a structured literacy intervention, or do they need something else? Maybe they need multisensory math, because they're dyslexic and they're not grasping some of the math concepts. So it really should be starting from a framework of looking at all the data and determining present levels. And I'm just going to pause, Lorraine, because I'm kind of plowing through all of this, but I don't know if there's any questions. Feel free to interrupt me if there are, and otherwise I'll just keep talking. Does that sound good?
That sounds good. No questions yet, Lorraine.
Okay. So mistake number 3, when I was thinking about, what have I heard about, what have I seen in action, and what did I do when I was advocating for my son all those years ago, which I would consider to, in hindsight, be a critical mistake, is agreeing to goals and services that aren't SMART. And when we're talking about SMART, we're talking about goals that are specific, they're measurable by some type of a standard, they are attainable, right? They're realistic, and they're time bound. Typically, IEP goals are written for that next school year. So they're annual goals that are written to be accomplished in that next school year. And I always add on to the T at the end of SMART goals that they're tailored for your child, because we do want to make sure that, while it's not the norm, I'm pleased to say it's not the norm, I have advocated in some school districts where they actually use goal templates, and they just kind of pull down a goal for fluency and determine, yep, that goal sounds good. And this is not really, to say the school district is proposing an inappropriate goal. It may or may not be appropriate, but even if you have a goal template, you want to make sure that you're using your child's data to kind of fill in the blanks to craft an effective IEP goal. And I'm going to give you an example here of a template that I share with parents. Actually, before we do that, of course, we just want to say special education is not one size fits all. And sometimes parents say to me, well, how do you emphasize that with a school team? And I think it's easy to say that the I in IEP is for an individualized education plan. So again, we're not looking at templates. We're not looking at what was done for another student or how do we provide reading intervention for all of our middle school kids. It's really what does this individual child need in their IEP, and do we have the data to support it? And then what kind of a goal are we going to put together? And to help parents understand that, I do like to share this goal template tool, which we put together to kind of demonstrate what SMART goals look like. And this is, here you have kind of a fill in the blank template that any parent can use, but it basically says, by 1 year from the IEP date, so that's time bound, when given a task they need to master, that's the specific skill that we're trying to master, the student, so it's individualized for that student, will be able to measure success. In the case of students with dyslexia, they're either going to be able to decode or encode or read fluently. And then frequency is how frequently are we looking for them to accomplish this skill? And then opportunities measured by what is the progress monitoring method that we plan to use as an IEP team. So what does this look like when you fill it all in? And again, this is a tool that parents can use. When they're given a draft IEP, I believe we have this on our website, and if we don't, please feel free to email us and we're happy to share it. But you could pull out something like our SMART goal template, compare it to your child's individualized IEP goals, and look and see, does it have all of these components? So just an example of a SMART goal for a student with dyslexia. This is a proposed fluency goal. It says by August 12th of 2021, when given an unfamiliar 4th grade text, Jane Doe will be able to read 120 correct words per minute in 3 out of 4 opportunities as measured by curriculum-based fluency measurements. And there are some, important pieces of data that we've kind of included in here, like unfamiliar grade level text and read correct words per minute, not just words per minute, as well as ensuring that we're using curriculum-based measures, not measuring a child's performance as compared to their performance, last week, but comparing their performance to what is the curriculum requirement. So when we say curriculum-based measurements, what we're talking about there is if we're using, a packaged Orton Gillingham program, let's just say we're using language exclamation mark or something like that, that program has curriculum-based measurements, unit mastery test. If we're using pure authentic OG, there's OG leveled assessments that students should be able to master if they have truly made progress in certain skills. So hopefully this gives you some idea about what a SMART goal might look like for your child. And another, comment that parents are sharing with me frequently is as we're looking to go back to the school year and new teachers are being assigned, and sometimes parents are well aware that teachers, some teachers in certain schools have more training than others, and they're very concerned about who's going to be assigned to my child. And while as advocates, I always say, it really isn't appropriate to demand or to tell the school who should be teaching your child, because the regulations really only require that the school district provide a licensed, teacher to teach in the state of Virginia. And in the case of special education students, it's a licensed special education teacher. But when we're talking about a student who has dyslexia, if the student has dyslexia, an appropriate instructional or teacher match should be with a student who has received specialized training in working with kids who have dyslexia. So you don't necessarily have to, as a parent, be demanding a certain teacher or, saying my child should be in this class and why are they not in this class? But I do encourage parents to ask about the special training that the teacher has received who's going to be working with their dyslexic child, because I do believe that having a teacher who has received the appropriate level of training that the student requires is the best match, and the IEP team should want that in order to ensure progress for that student so that they can be successful. So
Lorraine, can we take is it a good time to take a break for a second for 2
Absolutely.
questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on one second. If my child isn't meeting her IEP goals and needs an OG trained tutor and the school doesn't have one on staff, can they help pay for this?
Can they help pay for this? So that is a very common question that I hear. And I'm going to ask you to read it in parts, Lorraine, so that I can speak to each part of that question because there's a lot of good stuff in there. And whoever asked it, I want to make sure I address it. What was the first part? If they're not meeting their goals, is that what it said?
If my child isn't meeting her IEP goals and needs an OG trained tutor.
Okay, so the first part of that is of course, it is not impossible that a school district might contract a private provider to provide specially designed Orton Gillingham instruction for a student who needs it. But to that point, they're first going to require that their school staff be given the opportunity to provide specially designed instruction for your child. So it isn't a case of just knowing that your child needs Orton Gillingham and asking a school district to pay for it, and they just automatically say, yes, of course, we're happy to pay for it. Because in many of our school districts now in Northern Virginia, teachers have been trained. And as parents, I know we want to have teachers who've had 2,000 hours in Orton Gillingham, but the Institute of Multisensory Education says that if teachers have had, I think it's approximately 30 hours of classroom instruction, they meet the requirement according to their standards to provide this instruction during the school day. And please don't misunderstand, I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with all of this, but I'm just saying that in some cases it is possible that with the right instructional match, using the curriculum, the Orton Gillingham or the structured literacy curriculum that the school district has in place, I've seen it with my own eyes over the years. Many kids can make progress in that environment. That said, there are some students whose needs, because they have maybe much slower processing speed than their peers, they might have the most severe level of dyslexia. They might have attention deficit along with dyslexia. They may not be ideal candidates for a small group intervention in a public school setting. So what I would say to that parent is if the school district has already tried to help your child and they've already provided specially designed instruction and you have data to show, again, here we come back to the data, right? Progress monitoring data to show that your child has not made meaningful progress towards their goals, then number one, you need to reconvene your IEP team to talk about why is that, right? Do we need to change the instructional match, meaning who's delivering the instruction? Do we need to intensify the instruction, going from a small group to maybe one-on-one? Do we need to layer in another level of specially designed instruction? Maybe we need to add phonemic awareness along with decoding and orthographic mapping. So oftentimes what I see as an advocate is only after all of this has been done, if the student still is not able to make meaningful progress towards their IEP goals, then that is the time through dispute resolution methods, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, potentially, depending upon the district, it is not inconceivable that they will hire or contract with someone else who has a different service level and qualification to work with your child. So I hope that answers the question. I'm sorry that was a long explanation, but there's so many components to that question that I wanted to make sure I touched on all of them.
Thank you, Lorraine. And then the second question, do you find that draft IEP goals are often SMART as written in Loudoun County Public Schools?
Well, yes and no. It depends on, who's writing those goals. And I will say that sometimes I am pleasantly surprised. Sometimes I am, happy to see what the school district is proposing, and maybe they've got many of the right components in place, or maybe we just need to tweak them slightly. And then unfortunately there's other cases where maybe through no fault of the school staff, they haven't been trained appropriately on how to write IEP goals. Can't really speak to why it happens, but then there are times where I see goals that definitely are not SMART. And that's where, parents, either on their own or with the help of an advocate, really do have to ensure that the team write a SMART goal for their child. Because in my opinion, if we don't have a SMART goal, we're really not setting that child up to make meaningful progress that school year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. These are great questions. So thank you to the parents who are asking them. So mistake number 4, this is another one that, we talk about in our community quite often. And I hope that parents don't feel that we're blaming them in any way. As I said, when advocating for my own son, I made all of these mistakes at one point or another, and it's only through, professional education, experience, hard lessons learned, that once you know better, as they say, you do better. So we're calling these mistakes because we want to bring your attention to them, and so that, as parents, you don't make them, you can kind of avoid mistakes that others have made when you're advocating for your child. But something that I see quite often is parents who fail to request, create, or follow up on really important documentation. And we'll talk about specifically the documentation that I'm referring to, but one of the easiest ways to follow up with your school IEP team to ensure that everyone is on the same page is to draft a quick thank you letter or a thank you email that recaps your understanding of the IEP team discussion, the decisions that were made, and any areas that you want to document your understanding of. And I always encourage parents, after they write this letter, kind of in the last paragraph, to say, if my understanding or if our understanding of the IEP team meeting discussion and the decisions made is inaccurate in any way, please let us know as soon as possible. And I think this is a really important step that, while it might feel like, okay, another thing we have to do, it's really important to ensure that everyone heard the same thing, that everybody was agreeing at the end of the discussion to the same decision, because sometimes we hear what we want to hear, or maybe somebody failed to write down that we agreed we're going to do this many minutes of intervention this many times a week, and then when you actually get the document, it's different. So I definitely do recommend that even if you're having a quick conversation with a teacher or an administrator on the phone, or if we're all back in the physical school building, parents often will talk to teachers or administrators in the hallway. Even then, I think it's a great idea, and I recommend it as an advocacy strategy to, go home, sit down, quickly write a thank you email. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me about my son, Jonathan's reading. I really appreciate your insights and your suggestions. And from our discussion, it's my understanding that he is now going to be placed in the specialized, structured literacy reading group, and you're going to start collecting data, baseline data on how he's doing. And then when we meet with his IEP team, we're going to revise his goals, whatever it is. So parents can do that. And those emails, those thank you letters, those can potentially become important documents that you might need if you're having to work through dispute resolution methods that we're going to get to in just a moment. So another important point that I want to share with your community is that parents can review student records, upon request. And this is something that many parents don't know that they can do. And they often tell me, I wonder what's in my child's file. And I will share with them, well, one of your rights as parents is to inspect and review your child's cumulative file. Now, you do, of course, have to ask permission, and then, the school team might say, we need to arrange a time when this is convenient for us, and it may be, up to 45 days that you have to wait. But I do encourage parents, if they have any concerns, if they're in any kind of dispute with the school district, go ahead and request that you want the opportunity to review and inspect your students' records. And if for any reason you find something that is inaccurate or you don't agree with, you can request an amendment of record. And this is all, regulatory guidance language that oftentimes, because they don't do this every day, parents aren't familiar that they have these options. And again, just because you request an amendment of record doesn't mean the school district is going to necessarily agree, but it does open the door to that discussion point. And if they don't agree to amend the record, they do need to let you know of your right to request a due process hearing, should you choose to do so on that particular point. So mistake number 5, and this is another very important one, and one that often leads a lot of parents to my door requesting for professional advocacy services, is parents will provide verbal consent in an IEP meeting, or what I call quick consent. Because let's face it, after we've been sitting at an IEP table for an hour, maybe it's an hour and a half, It's been emotional, difficult conversation. Parents are drained and they're just looking to get out of there a lot of the times. Even online, they're like, okay, sounds good, gotta go. But before parents sign their child's proposed IEP, I always say, make sure you get a copy in writing. While everything sounds good, you want the opportunity as a parent to review it in its entirety in writing. And you can just say to the team, I'm going to need it 24 hours, 48 hours to review this, and then I will get it back to you with my consent option. We have here PWN off to the side. So review any PWN. What we're referring to there is a prior written notice document. And this is in Virginia, another procedural safeguard that is made available to parents. And a prior written notice document is a document that the school district creates in an IEP meeting or potentially in an eligibility meeting, where anytime they propose to change the identification of a student from general education to special education, or anytime they say we're going to give your child evaluation assessment, whenever a school district is proposing to do something different, to change something, or they might be refusing your parental request, it's these decisions and the data that's considered along with other factors that the team is looking at prior to reaching that decision. All of that information is supposed to be captured in a prior written notice document. And then a copy of that prior written notice document is supposed to be made available to the parent along with the proposed IEP. And as an advocate, too often I do see parents receiving a proposed IEP without a prior written notice document, or they'll get the IEP and then the school team will say, well, it's going to take us a couple weeks to finalize the prior written notice document. And in my professional opinion, you really want to review both at the same time to ensure that the IEP is correct, that all of the decision making was recorded correctly, that if you need to request an amendment of record for the prior written notice, up front that you need to do that before you provide any level of consent. And many times parents don't realize that they have consent options. So we've included on here that parents should consider partial consent when appropriate, that you don't have to sign in full consent, you don't have to refuse to sign at all, that in some cases with students' initial IEPs and what have you, you can agree to part of the IEP that can be implemented, and then you can continue to work with your child's school team on any areas of disagreement. So number 6, in terms of parents wanting to be, from my perspective, I want parents to know that they really should exercise their procedural safeguards. And too often we see that parents are hesitating to do so, or they haven't done so, and that's why they're now needing the help of a professional advocate. So, just know that there are multiple procedural safeguards. Any parent who might be viewing this can go to the Virginia Department of Education. They can look for the procedural safeguards that exist for special education students in the state of Virginia. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of the ones that I feel are most important. We did just talk about prior written notice, but I want your community, Lorraine, to know that this is a procedural safeguard. So this is really not optional. So if a parent requests a prior written notice and the school team, implies that that's not required, they don't have to do it, I just want parents to know it is required by the procedural safeguards that parents receive a prior written notice after an IEP meeting. The other procedural safeguard that I believe could be very beneficial to parents, even in cases where they're in full agreement with their child's IEP team, is exercising your right to audio record your child's IEP meeting. And many parents will tell me, well, I have a great relationship with the school and everything is going really well except for my child's services, and I really don't want to rock the boat, and I'm afraid to say that I'm going to audio record the meeting because they might get the wrong impression. So what I want to share with your community is that audio recording an IEP meeting isn't something that you alone are asking to do. It's a procedural safeguard that exists for all parents in the state of Virginia who are attending IEP meetings. So I think as long as you request this respectfully and professionally and provide your IEP team with at least 24 hours notice that you do plan to audio record your child's IEP meeting, because many times school teams will want the opportunity to audio record from their end as well, there's no reason why you should hesitate to use this procedural safeguard. And as we said earlier, IEP meetings can be emotional. They can be stressful. You may not be able to process everything that's happening in that moment. So getting or having an audio recording, being able to potentially get that transcribed or listen to it later, could help you even in situations where you don't, plan to pursue any type of dispute resolution methods, but you just want to ensure that you heard everything correctly. So I would, suggest that this is definitely an advocacy strategy that I encourage my clients to implement and your audience as well. Another important procedural safeguard is, requesting an independent educational evaluation if you believe your child needs one. And, parents will say to me, well, what is an independent educational evaluation? And this is really the opportunity for parents to request a second opinion. So you can get a second psychoeducational evaluation done by a private clinician of your choice. While a school district will offer suggestions for clinicians, parents are not restricted or limited to who they can hire as long as they meet the requirements of being a licensed, evaluator, if they're a psychologist or what have you. And it's really parents' opportunity to get a second opinion if they disagree with the findings of the school district's evaluation. Now, sometimes parents will automatically say, well, I need to get an IEE. And I'm going to suggest that not always do you need to get an IEE. If, the district's evaluation shows everything that you believe it needs to show in terms of your child's, strengths and needs, and you're happy with what the school team is proposing in terms of goals and services and accommodations, then, it may not be appropriate to have your child go through 6 more hours of testing to find similar results. But in some cases, parents will get a school district psychoeducational evaluation, and they might find themselves very surprised at the results, and they may not agree with the results, and they may think, that in those cases, maybe if the child is denied eligibility for an IEP, that a second set of professional eyes and expertise is warranted in evaluating their child. And that's where it does make, really good sense and is an effective way to advocate for your child to request an independent educational evaluation. Because then once that evaluation has been conducted, the results and the findings will be shared with your child's IEP team, and you can then use that data, to work with your child's team to see if you need to revise IEP goals, services, and accommodations. The other important procedural safeguard, as we've touched on, is consent. I do find too often, once parents find their way to our door and to our email, that they didn't realize that they had multiple consent options. So I just want to emphasize again that if you're not in agreement, or let's just say hypothetically, your child has made so much progress, you don't believe they need special education supports and services anymore, parents can revoke consent to finding their child eligible as a special education student in the state of Virginia. So there's ways to consent to a proposed IEP. There's ways that parents can revoke their consent. And I always say, if you're confused at all about what are your consent options when you're being asked to provide your signature for eligibility or services, I encourage you to ask the school team, ask the special education supervisor, what are my consent options? And have them explain to you what are your rights as a parent of a child with disabilities. Number 7, and I know this might seem like something we could all kind of come up with on our own, but I do want to mention that even when we all, as parents, head to IEP meetings with the best intentions, sometimes we lose our cool. We say inappropriate things. Sometimes parents actually curse at IEP meetings, or they get so upset they walk out of IEP meetings. And I just want to encourage your community to try their best, to stay professional, assertive, advocate for their child to the best of their ability, and to not personalize a school district's refusal as a personal attack. And I think that too often that is a mistake that parents make, is they they personalize the district's refusal to maybe honor their request or, provide certain intervention. And they think that it's because, they are who they are, this person's parents, or the way they look, or what race they are, or what have you. And, in my experience, 10 times out of 10, it's because we don't yet have the data that we need at that IEP table to convince the team that your child needs that goal or that service or that accommodation. So what I would say is that instead of, and I know it's hard, I do want to acknowledge that this is not easy, right? So if you're the parent that might get more emotional, maybe you have a game plan with your husband, or you bring a family friend who's going to, work on your behalf, or you hire a professional advocate who's going to, kind of lead this discussion for you if you think you're going to lose your temper in the meeting. But instead of personalizing refusal in that moment, ask, well, what additional data do we need for you to be in agreement with our request? And, that is now a productive discussion. Now we're not blaming, we're not being rude, we're not saying inappropriate comments that are potentially being recorded. If you're utilizing your procedural safeguard to record the meeting, they're going to hear you on tape saying inappropriate things if this, goes down the line towards any type of dispute resolution. So as hard as it is, when you feel that you're getting emotional, try to focus on the data. Try to take it away from any kind of a personal attack, because at the end of the day, our relationships with our school district, they really do matter. And, as an advocate, my relationship with school districts matters as well. And I don't want to see parents losing their own credibility because, they are being antagonistic, or they're being rude, or they're overly emotional, when really that was not their intention. They just didn't know that they should be asking for additional assessments or additional data. So, one of the things that I like to do with parents through events like this is, educate them on their rights so that they know, we have rights, we can ask for this information and not be aggravating the IEP team and having unproductive conversations. I do encourage parents to stay professional as possible, to not personalize things. And I know in my own journey as a mom, going way back years ago, it was really important for me to forgive a lot of the school staff that, I didn't realize it at the time. I did kind of personalize it. I couldn't understand why they weren't making just different decisions when I was bringing them evaluations that showed exactly what my child needed. So, it is hard to forgive. But I think that if you as a parent are trying to effectively advocate for your child, forgiveness is a big part of it. And choosing to be part of the solution for your child and less of the problem will go a long way. I also encourage parents to be as transparent as possible. I have yet to see a situation where withholding information, withholding a diagnosis, withholding data has led to an appropriate decision for that child. So we always like to say, be transparent versus tricky. And I think you're going to find when advocating for your child, this leads to a whole lot more success and a lot less stress. Okay, let's see here. Oops, there we go. So mistake number 8, we talked a little bit about making sure that you know what are the follow-up action steps that should be happening now that you're done with the child's IEP meeting, at whatever point you're meeting throughout the course of the school year. This might be an annual IEP, this might be a second IEP, a continuation of the first IEP because you weren't able to get everything done as planned. But I always say to parents, before you leave that meeting, make sure you ask, what are the follow-up action steps? Who's doing what? Are we meeting again? Let's go ahead while we're all here together as a group and pick a date and time so we have that on the calendar. If you've talked with the IEP team about getting additional assessments, when are those assessments taking place? Who's going to be giving them? When can you expect the results? What will happen once you have the results? Will you come back together as a team? Are there other individuals that the IEP team or the case manager should be reaching out to based upon your review of the data and maybe some new identified needs? Maybe we need to have somebody consulting and collaborating with assistive technology or occupational therapy or speech language. Who's going to be doing that? What is the follow-up, and what do you as parents have to do in order for that to happen? Sometimes parents have to give consent for additional assessments, sometimes not. But I think that too often we get to the end of an IEP meeting, there's been really good discussion, everyone's kind of done, everyone's jumping off the meeting if it's online or quickly rushing out the door, and a lot of these loose ends have not been decided. So, as parents, you can certainly be asking these questions and asking the team to commit, because as we said, you are an essential member of your child's IEP team. So it's appropriate that you should be a part of the follow-up. And, if you're not getting the information, if let's just say, they said hypothetically, somebody from assistive technology is going to contact you in a week and that doesn't happen, I really want parents to understand they're not being a problem if they ask, hey, what happened? I thought we were going to hear from somebody in the assistive technology department, but that as an essential member of your child's IEP team, this would be appropriate to follow up and to find out where the team is in that process. So number 9 is one that I haven't talked a lot about, but it's something I've seen a lot happening recently. And in my opinion, it is a mistake for parents to pursue formal dispute resolution options too soon. And when we're talking about formal dispute resolution options, we're really talking about requesting mediation, filing a state complaint, or actually filing a claim for due process, which is actually saying, I don't believe the school district is providing my child with a free and appropriate public education. So I'm filing a claim, which is requesting a hearing to determine by a hearing officer if my child is being given a free and appropriate public education. And too often, what I see happen is parents will go to one IEP meeting, maybe 2 IEP meetings. They'll have all these things that they want. Maybe the school district just says no, or maybe they don't like the response, or they don't want to spend the time to get the additional data. So they'll say, well, we're just going to, request mediation, or we're going to write a complaint. Well, complaints, have to be investigated. Oftentimes they're investigated for 45 days, and mediation is voluntary on both parties' parts. So while I have had great results in accompanying parents to mediation meetings, really whatever foundation we've set with that school district carries over into the mediation discussions. And so if we haven't had a positive experience prior to mediation, the school district doesn't even have to agree to go to mediation and to participate in any type of problem solving discussion for your child. So then, you're really only left with the option of hiring an attorney, because even though advocates can file due process cases in Virginia, I personally, as an advocate, don't believe that they should. So I would refer anyone who asked me about that to a special education attorney. And I just don't think that's the most effective way to advocate for your child. So there is one other option that I didn't put on this presentation, but that I do want to share with your audience that can sometimes be beneficial for parents, and that is to request a facilitated IEP meeting through the Virginia Department of Education. But no matter what you do, any of these dispute resolution methods, to include having a facilitator, an impartial facilitator come in and try to run the IEP meeting to a more productive conclusion, you want to try to work through them before you just go off and hire an attorney and file suit against your local school district. Because as we said, parents are going to be working with their school district if they stay in the area, maybe up until the child's in their early 20s, meeting once a year up until the child's in their early 20s. So oftentimes by requesting additional assessments, using IEs, getting different data, using progress monitoring data to see if the child is or is not making progress, many of these disputes can actually be resolved at the IEP table. In the time of COVID, we had a lot of collaborative discussions with IEP teams about recovery services and even compensatory services for kids who had significant learning loss as a result of not receiving their specially designed instruction. And I know, some people might think it sounds very Pollyanna-ish to say, well, just be collaborative. But truthfully, being professional, being collaborative, can go a long way in working with your school district and using the data. As I mentioned in the beginning, the data is really what's going to drive the decisions, whether you're at the IEP table or working with an attorney through a due process case. So we would encourage you to stay as collaborative as possible. And when we talk about the data and we talk about dispute resolution, I always like to encourage parents, get your stuff, your ducks in a row as well. Because if you do request mediation, if you do end up in a due process hearing, whoever is overseeing the mediation and the due process is going to look at and consider, well, what did the parents do in an effort to try to resolve their dispute with the district? Did they participate in a facilitated IEP? Did they request mediation, or did the district request mediation and the parents refused? So while all of these options do exist, it could potentially impact parents' credibility and ultimately what type of educational plan and services their child receives in the public school system. And number 10, I would say, which is one we don't talk about a whole lot, but when it's appropriate to do so, and parents know their kids best, the regulations, will suggest that children can be included in their IEP meetings at about age 14, but I have actually seen kids younger than 14 be very powerful self-advocates. And when I'm working with families, sometimes they'll say, well, my child doesn't have the attention or the patience to sit through an hour-long IEP meeting, or, I'm really hesitant to have them hear that they're, borderline deficient in sentence writing fluency, or that their word attack skills are in the 1 percentile. And I would wholeheartedly agree that we don't want our kids to have any kind of negative social emotional impact from attending their IEP meeting. But again, depending upon their age, it is perfectly appropriate to have them join the IEP meeting for maybe the first 5 to 15 minutes. They can either introduce themselves, or you as parents can introduce them. Depending upon your child's comfort level, they can talk about, what's working well for them in school, what is not working for them, what is especially challenging. And a lot of the times, the child, they're the ones receiving the services and the accommodations. They can dispel any assumptions, whereas the school staff and the parents are kind of guessing and talking and putting things in place. The child, if they're at the meeting, can say, that doesn't actually work for me. Oh, and by the way, that software, it doesn't work the way that you think it does. It's not compatible with my other software, and here's why it presents a huge problem for me. So again, when age appropriate to do so, I do think it's really beneficial, even though it might require some prep work on the parent's part with their child, and it might be a little stressful for the parent to think that their child's going to attend a meeting. You can always audio or video record your child as well if they don't want to actually show up live in their IEP meeting. But I do think that the student's voice next to the parents is the most impactful voice in the room. And, they're the ones that are receiving this. And once they get older and they're in high school and college, really, they do need to learn how to advocate for themselves, be comfortable with their learning differences, be able to go to the college disability rights office and tell them what they need. So I did want to mention this as something that I see parents hesitant to do, and that I think could make a really meaningful difference in a lot of IEP meetings. And, all of these mistakes aside, parents have great intentions. They might, somebody might view this presentation and say, yeah, I haven't made any of those mistakes, but I still have challenges working with my child's IEP team. So I did want to share that, we realize in some situations, parents are doing all the right things. They've avoided all these mistakes. They're still hitting roadblocks. They're still not having productive discussions. And, when do you get an advocate involved if you need an additional layer of support? So I wanted to offer you 4 different scenarios of when I think it would be important to consider bringing an advocate into your child's IEP meeting. And we do have here as a precursor to the IEP meeting, if as a parent, your child is not being found eligible and you have a lot of data, whether it's from your own observation or from outside sources, that tells you that your child really should be found eligible for services, but it just repeatedly you're not able to make that happen, that might be a time to reach out and get a second opinion by someone who attends hundreds of eligibility meetings in a school year. Or if as a parent, you're not comfortable going to meetings. I have a couple of clients who tell me they have PTSD from all of their kids' IEP meetings. And I say that kind of jokingly, but I totally understand it. And if you have 4 kids and 4 of them are dyslexic and you've been doing this for years, you might have had some unfortunate experiences and you may not be confident or comfortable doing that on your own. So if that's the case for you, definitely reach out to any advocate who you feel is qualified to work with you on behalf of your child. And we also see cases where children, they hate school, their anxiety is so high, they won't even get in the car or get on the bus, they can't walk in the building. Some students are actually, they have somatic symptoms, they get physically ill, they're in the bathroom all the time. At night, homework ends in tears, they're hiding under the table. The whole family is in a case of real disharmony. And if that's happening to you, if you're losing sleep, if everyone is in family therapy over your child's learning disabilities, I would definitely encourage you to consult with an advocate. And lastly, if your child is being repeatedly disciplined and the school team is kind of missing why they have the behaviors that they do and hasn't really explored and ruled out, could your child's behavior or misbehavior be related to any kind of frustration due to attention challenges or lack of being able to read and write and spell and do what everyone else is doing, then that would be an important time to consult with an advocate and potentially an attorney if your child is being, suspended multiple times or possibly expelled from the public school system. And, because I have spent this entire pandemic helping families try to navigate, advocating for their children, working at the IEP table, it really took this pandemic for me to realize that so many of our parents are quietly struggling on their own. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know who to turn to. They don't know who to trust. And so one of the things that my team and I have created is an opportunity for you to attend a private training that we're offering on September 2nd at 7 p.m. And this is a great opportunity for you to come and spend some time with us. If you are the parent of a student with dyslexia or you suspect that your child does have dyslexia, we'd love to have you join us on September 2nd. I'm going to kind of break down the proven framework that I use when I'm advocating for kids who have dyslexia. We're going to talk about, the critical tools and the mindset shift and all of the important knowledge points that parents really need to have and understand when they're trying to be an effective advocate for their child. And as we said, if you're the parent of a student with dyslexia, it really benefits you to know all of this information because you're going to be doing this year after year after year. So if you are interested in this private training, it is coming right up. We are asking parents to apply for it because we respect your time and we want to make sure that we have the right audience so that the content will be meaningful for them. So you can, head to our website. I think we have a special spot there that if you're interested, you can sign up, and we'll look forward to seeing you on September 2nd for a more lengthier discussion about what does an appropriate educational plan look like for a student with dyslexia and how does a parent get that. And even if you're not able to join us on September 2nd, I do want to share that, as we said, parents who have kids with dyslexia, a minimum of once a year, the school team's going to be asking you to meet with them. And, it really is something that you're going to be working on over the school years with your child at whatever level they're comfortable participating or not participating. And it's not a sprint. It's not a one and done. And I think that's a hard thing for parents to kind of accept, is that, yes, you have to keep having these conversations, keep looking at the data, keep determining present levels and needs. Have they changed? Because as your child moves from elementary to middle school and middle school to high school and then high school into their career or college or what have you, these conversations are going to need to continue to happen. So I don't want to be discouraging. I want to be encouraging and say, as long as you realize that this is not a one and done, and that, you can learn these tools, you can learn these strategies, you can definitely, as a parent and an essential member of the IEP team, learn how to effectively advocate for your child. And there's individuals like, me and my team that are happy to support you. Anything really can be possible. And of course, like most things that take effort and are not always easy, parents sometimes ask me, well, this is a lot of work or this is a lot of information. And I always say, well, yeah, it's not really easy, but at the end of the day, it's absolutely worth it. And I can tell you that as an advocate who's been doing this for some time, I have seen with my own eyes, even during the pandemic, that kids have been getting appropriate services. They have been closing their achievement gap. They are, their self-confidence is increasing. They're taking on leadership roles with appropriate accommodations. They're ending up on their school honor roll. And, it hasn't been easy for these families. They've had to potentially work on their own or hire an advocate or go to more meetings than they cared to or reach out to other individuals in the school district. But it absolutely has been worth it. And their kids are not only, thriving in school, but they're really kind of thriving in life because they're not in that place where they were before when they didn't really know, what was going on or how to help them. So if you're sitting there listening to all of this and you're like, well, this is interesting. I don't know if my child has dyslexia or my child has dyslexia, or we really maybe haven't touched on your concern tonight because this was a very focused presentation for parents who have kids with IEPs. I do want to put my contact information up here. You feel free to reach out to us. We have educational blogs that we write on a regular basis. We have resources on our website. We have a great video done by the Dyslexia Training Institute on what is dyslexia on our resource page. But we really do want to support parents who are part of the dyslexic community. It's definitely, it feels kind of overused to say that last year was an unprecedented school year, but I think unfortunately this year is also going to be a very untraditional school year. And while I'm optimistic and hopeful that everyone's going to be back in the building, which will be better for our kids and hopefully have more direct, explicit, frequent instruction, we do realize that there's bumps in the road. So feel free to reach out to us in whatever way you might need to if you need a little bit of support along the way. And with that, Lorraine, I'm going to turn it over to you in case there are any additional questions.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. That was so helpful. And we do have a couple of questions. What is the process to be able to record a meeting? I requested it prior to a meeting and was told it would not be doable. Is there a certain time frame in which you need to request or ask to record a meeting?
So I just want to clarify for that parent that so the way the recording works is that parents have the right to audio record, okay? Not always video record. And that has been challenging during the pandemic because a lot of school teams are using Zoom or Google Meet or GoToMeeting or what have you. So I think that if you're going to record a meeting and you want to record the meeting, you just need to distinguish what type of recording you're requesting and be prepared as a parent to kind of bring your own equipment. So my recommendation is that you're looking to audio record. That is your request. You want to give at least 24 hours notice. It's not required, but I think it's best practices. And you can use, the app on your phone. You can get, kind of an independent handheld tape recorder off of Amazon, but you just want to notify the team that you're recording and you want to let them know that you're interested in an audio recording. You're not asking to video record. So maybe that's where there was some confusion, but it is one of your procedural safeguards in Virginia that really shouldn't be refused. And again, as we said, if you ask the school team to audio record and they're telling you, I'm sorry, that's not possible, and you're like, well, I can provide the audio recorder, I can make it happen on my end, and they say, no, we're preventing you from doing that, as a parent, you can request a prior written notice on that. And I would recommend that you do. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Second question, what kind of data can I bring in if I'm seeking accommodations for a child with ADHD? And then the second part of that question, any other advice for behavioral issues?
So the data that parents might want to consider bringing in for a student who has ADHD can be parent created data, right? We talked a little bit about that earlier in the presentation. So you might do your own observations, and even in a spiral notebook, you might want to write down, how often do you have to repeat directions to your child? Do you have to prompt them through multi-step multi-step request. I know my own son has ADHD, and when he was younger, I'd say, grab, get your shoes, get your water bottle, pack your backpack. I try to roll off like 4 things, and he'd be doing number one, and then he wouldn't know where to go from there. So anything that you notice as a parent as it pertains to your child's functional independence throughout a school day, I would say you can capture your own data on it and you can share it with the IEP team. So just a couple of examples: time on task, fidgetiness during dinner, can they do multi-step request when you give them to your child? How much prompting, reinforcement, reminders of the multi-step task do they require? What is the child's self-report? Some kids will say, well, there's just so much going on in my head, I really can't hear what you're saying, or I was just kind of zoning out. How often are they zoning out throughout the course of the school day? Or even when they're on the soccer field, or even when they're with their friends. Some kids can tell their parents, well, that happens to me all the time. It happens to me at breakfast. It happens to me on the bus. That's important information, because in a school setting, they might be missing content. They might need the accommodation of pre-teaching and reteaching because they missed such significant amounts of content, right? So I would say there's a lot of parent anecdotal data that you could provide. If your child has been evaluated by the school district, of course, you can consider an IE to get additional diagnostic data as it pertains to, self-regulation, impulse control, their ability to do tasks that are related to ADHD, executive function skills. If they're working with a private occupational therapist, that individual might have some information as it pertains to a student with ADHD. But I'm just throwing out some ideas off the top of my head. Did I address the whole question, Lorraine, though? I feel like there was a second part to that. I want to make sure I answered the whole thing.
The second part was any other advice for behavioral issues?
Well, maybe that parent can tell us what are the behavioral issues. I do, maybe, I don't know if they're typing in a chat or what have you. Like, is this?
I am, and I can tell the person, I'm not going to say your name because I'm protecting your identity. But if you'd like me to mute your microphone and you'd like to ask the question directly, follow up, that's fine too. Just let me know.
Okay. And I'm just
okay, no, not to ask directly, but do you want to then type in the chat box a little bit more about the behavioral issues you're referring to? I'll just give that a second.
Yeah, and while that individual is considering, what they want to share, oftentimes, and I don't know much about this student, right? But as I said earlier, when there's behavioral issues, for me as an advocate, there's usually those behavioral issues are usually a symptom of something else. So definitely, whether it's a check-in by a private therapist or a school counselor or the parent, if they have an open relationship with their child, I think there's some, deeper digging that has to happen to determine, what is causing this behavior? Like, what is the child being asked to do when the behavior is presenting itself? And for some kids with disabilities, there's even what's called an FBA that the IEP team can request, a functional behavioral analysis. And that is more of a formal behavioral assessment that's done by the school team. They might even put a behavior plan in place. They might bring in a board certified behavior analysis or analyst, pardon me. So it really depends on like what kind of behaviors are we talking about, right? Is it anxiety? Is it school refusal? Is it physical aggression? Because each behavior kind of has its own recommendations that can go along with it.
Okay, and she said that was very helpful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Lorraine today? Well, certainly, there's another set of challenges this year with these issues with, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the hardship in making the transition to the, school at home and having these meetings on virtually. So thank you so much, Lorraine, for being here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to end, I think that was a great point you brought up. I just want to end on the point that in spite of everything, right? In spite of the hybrid model, the closed schools, the masks, no masks, that the federal obligation to school districts districts has not changed, that there has been no waiver on FAPE, free and appropriate public education, and that regardless of where our kids are, home, in school, with a mask, without a mask, that their unique needs are supposed to be met. So I do want parents to feel empowered going forward. I hope this information has been helpful. And thank you so much, Lorraine, for inviting me to come back to your community.
You're welcome. And thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very positive thing that there have been no changes. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. All right.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and stay tuned. Keep in touch with our calendar. I'm sure Lorraine will be back for another session.